So as I mentioned in my recent video for 90 Day Fiancé Happily Ever After, I'm back to talk about 90 Day Fiancé The Other Way. This is now going to be season 7 and I'm about 3 episodes in at this point. There's a few more out now, but there was just so much going on in just the first 3 that I just had to take a second to report back here for you guys. So we got a few new couples and 2 returning couples that you would have probably seen if you've watched the other 90 Day Fiancé The Other Way seasons. But our new couples are Greta and Matthew, Anthony and Manan, Patia and Dylan, and Khloe and Johnny. And our 2 returning couples are Jenny and Sumit, and Luke and Madeline. So let's get into it. So let's start off with Greta and Matthew. So Greta is from Oklahoma and Matthew is from England. They apparently met each other on a vegan dating site. Y'all let me know if y'all heard of such a thing before, but I definitely hadn't before watching this show. But yeah, apparently that's a real thing, and they ended up connecting and eventually taking flights to see each other in person and bonding over their love of animals, specifically cats. But Matthew does end up proposing, so now Greta is giving up her life and career in Oklahoma and heading to the English countryside to go and live her fairy tale with Matthew. However, naturally, there are a few bumps in the road. Matthew is currently living with his parents and keeps promising Greta that they'll find a place for just them, and he's been kind of dragging his feet on doing so. Even though his parents are very nice and accommodating, it's a little awkward, and Greta hadn't had the best of times growing up with her dad and stepmom after her mother had passed away, so living with Matthew's family is thankfully the opposite for her, but it's still not going to be a lot of space. On top of everything, she has to give up her pet cat Hazel, who she claims to have a really deep emotional bond with, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that. She basically is in love with her cat. Matthew is probably the first person that she can really say she bonded with romantically because she's probably been so consumed with cat mom life. But anywho, she hands Hazel to some friends of hers to take care of her until Matthew could find a place for them because there are other pets in his parents' house, and according to Greta, Hazel doesn't really do well with other animals. However, I am kind of curious about how things are going to work considering that Matthew also has a cat of his own called Apple, or Apples I think, and I like to see how Hazel would kind of mesh with another cat. But now Greta is kind of all packed up and she's heading to England by the end of episode 3. So next we have Anthony and Manan. So Anthony is from California, Manan is originally from France, but they now have a child together who Manan hasn't really gotten a chance to see much of since giving birth to him, and she's been really running herself into the ground working. She and Anthony have also been having some marital issues because of that, and they ultimately decide that the best thing for both of them would be to leave the US entirely and head over to France. But there is a lot of tension there, mainly because Manan saw herself staying in the US indefinitely to supposedly live the American dream, as she keeps saying, but now she says that it's costing her her marriage and also her time with her son. So now she has to decide between money and staying in the US and her husband and son. So she decides to go to France, and her husband Anthony agrees that it would also be the best thing. But it is a little awkward though when they go to tell Anthony's family, mainly because of his sister, who I guess Manan had confided in whenever she was frustrated with Anthony and their marriage. And she brings up that there was one occasion where she had said that she wanted to divorce him. Why she felt the need to say that right then and there is beyond me, but she did, and it started an argument which Anthony and his dad had to bring to an end, so that kind of ruined things for the evening. But they packed everything up in their house and moved into his aunt's home until their flight a few weeks later. They say their goodbyes, they get into their Uber to the airport, and they find themselves somehow in another argument. It's mainly because of Matthew though. I guess he was just really nervous and frustrated in that moment. You know, maybe that could have been the reason why he said something about wanting to see something different from Manan when they got to Marseille. But she does say that she'll remember that, and that holding grudges thing is kind of worrisome. But they land in France, they meet with Manan's parents. She clearly has mixed feelings. She's excited to see her family and watch them interact with their grandson, but she also starts getting emotional because she says that, being back there makes her feel like a failure. But she's there now, and they're going to have to make things work. With Patia and Dylan, there hasn't really been anything said just yet regarding their story in these first 3 episodes, but there will be some things to mention in the next video for sure. Our next couple is Khloe and Johnny. Now, Khloe is from Massachusetts and Johnny is from Aruba. They met while Khloe was on vacation in Aruba, and Johnny was one of the guys working on one of those pirate ship excursions where they just kind of fill you up with food and booze, and you could just kind of make bad decisions flipping off the ship into the ocean, sometimes drunk. But anywho, that's where they met, and ever since then, she had been coming back every few months to come and see him. However, they have been having issues with infidelity on Johnny's side. It's mainly because of his job, it seems, and him being a little bit of a flirt, trying to get good tips and whatnot. So it's a little bit of a sticky situation. Kind of reminds me of Danielle and Johan back in the DR. But even with all that at play, Khloe still decides to give up everything in Boston, pack everything up, and move to Aruba to be with Johnny. Now, Johnny thankfully has a place for just him, but I think he said that he was living with his mom until she recently passed away, unfortunately, so he's still dealing with that loss. But Khloe comes, he brings her flowers, but real life now starts. And when she gets to his place, which she has stayed at before, she's asking about hot water and air conditioning, and I'm like, welcome to the Caribbean, girl. Now, being from the Bahamas myself, I can tell you that those two things are a luxury. Those aren't accommodations that you're gonna find in every single house. What you will probably find is a gas stove, which Khloe seems to be kind of terrified of because she's used to using an electric one. So moving on to one of our returning couples, the first being Jenny and Sumit. We have definitely been through the mud with these two. They were holding on for dear life in this relationship. But the last time we saw them, they had just decided to go ahead and get married since his parents weren't getting on board. And they were pretty furious at first, but they eventually decided to just accept it. But his dad was definitely way more accepting at the time. His mom definitely was like, yeah, no. But now it seems as though Jenny and Sumit's parents have come a pretty long way with their relationship. His mom actually likes her now. However, I have a feeling that's not really gonna last long since she and Sumit are now moving into his parents' house because Sumit had ended up losing his job and they can't really afford to keep the apartment that they're in. On the very first day of their stay, Sumit's mom is going through Jenny's things, trying to tell her what she should and shouldn't keep. It was just a lot considering Sumit's brother, his wife, and their son are living there too, and now they're all trying to go into business together, working at a cafe that Sumit dumped all his money into. So that's going to be very interesting with them all living in the same house and all working at the same place. I'm just imagining that being so chaotic, but anyways. So they try to go to Sumit's friend, hoping that he would be able to give them some discounted secondhand cooking equipment since he also had some time in the food industry, but unfortunately all his ventures had failed. But instead of giving them a little bit of a break, it seems like at first he wanted top dollar for it, and it's just coming across like he's just jealous that Sumit is even doing this and might have a chance of being successful at this cafe thing. But he does eventually give Sumit a fair price on some of the items and they make a deal. Now our second returning couple, Luke and Madeline. Now, I do believe we left with Luke and Madeline talking about planning a wedding, but also Luke being in a crap ton of debt because of all of his failed business ventures, and I think he'd also lost his really high-paying job that had him and her sitting pretty. So she got pretty used to him just being her sugar daddy basically, but now he can't really afford it, and she was having difficulties understanding that. She believes that they could still have a nice and extravagant wedding, not really taking into consideration an actual budget. So not much has really changed. Madeline is still planning her expensive wedding and Luke is struggling to pay for it all. But now he's getting things ready to move to Colombia to be with her. Madeline, on the other hand, has her business to attend to that Luke had given her the money to start, of course. But right now, that's the only thing he invested in that's making money at the moment. It seems like it's such good money that Madeline decides to go on and purchase or at least put in a down payment on an apartment and doesn't say a word to Luke. She says it's something just for her and it sounds a little sketchy, but anyways. So before Luke leaves, his friends throw him a surprise bachelor party with a certain type of dancer, and immediately he's nervous about how Madeline would react, but to be fair, he didn't touch her, he just threw some money. His dad is the one to take him to the airport, but he's a little concerned about Luke not having made it clear to Madeline how much debt he's actually in and how bad things really are. But he wishes him the best, and it turns out that he was trying to get to Colombia a few days before he was actually supposed to because he wanted to surprise Madeline, so we'll see how that goes. But that's going to be it for the first 3 episodes. You guys can of course let me know what your thoughts are so far on these couples and their mess of a situation in some cases, but let me know down in the comments. I'll catch y'all in the next one.